Hi friends, welcome back to Ananth Science Academy. From this video, let's start the self-study series for class 11 with the first chapter, The Living World. What is living? Life is a unique, complex organization of molecules that expresses itself through chemical reactions which lead to growth, development, responsiveness, adaptation, and reproduction. The objects exhibiting growth, development, responsiveness, and other characteristics of life are designated as living beings. Properties of living organisms. Growth, reproduction, metabolism, cellular organization, and consciousness. Growth. All living organisms grow. It is the increase in number and mass of cells by cell division. In plants, growth continues throughout their lifespan. In animals, growth is only up to a certain age. However, cell division occurs to replace lost cells. Growth is the increase in mass and size. Non-living objects also grow by the accumulation of materials on the surface. Say for example, mountains, boulders, and sand mounds also grow. However, this kind of growth exhibited by non-living objects is by accumulation of material on the surface. So, growth is not a defining property of living organisms. In living organisms, growth is from inside. Reproduction. It is the production of progeny possessing features more or less similar to those of parents. Organisms reproduce sexually or asexually. In unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are same because they reproduce by cell division. Fungi multiply and spread easily due to the millions of asexual spores they produce. Lower organisms like Hydra and yeast reproduce by budding method. In planaria, we observe true regeneration. That is, a fragmented organism regenerates the last part of its body and becomes a new organism. Reproduction by fragmentation. The fungi, the filamentous algae, and protonema of mosses all easily multiply by fragmentation. When it comes to unicellular organisms like bacteria, unicellular algae, or amoeba, reproduction is synonymous with growth, that is, increase in number of cells. We have already defined growth as equivalent to increase in cell number or mass. Hence, we notice that in single-celled organisms, we are not very clear about the usage of these two terms, growth and reproduction. Many organisms do not reproduce. For example, mules, worker bees, and infertile human couple. A mule is the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse. Horses and donkeys are different species with different number of chromosomes. A worker bee is any female bee that lacks the full reproductive capacity of the colony's queen bee. Hence, reproduction is not a defining property of living organisms. Metabolism. What is metabolism? Metabolism refers to a series of chemical reactions that occur in a living organism to sustain life. There are two types. Catabolism. This process is mainly involved in breaking down larger organic molecules into smaller molecules. This metabolic process releases energy. Say for example, glycolysis. The other type is anabolism. This process is mainly involved in building up or synthesizing compounds from simpler substances required by the cells. This metabolic process requires and stores energy. For example, gluconeogenesis in the liver. The three main purposes of metabolism in a living organism are the conversion of food to energy to run cellular processes, the conversion of food or fuel to building blocks for proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, and some carbohydrates, etc. The third purpose is the elimination of metabolic wastes. No non-living object exhibits metabolism. Metabolic reactions can be demonstrated outside the body in cell-free systems. An isolated metabolic reaction outside the body of an organism performed in a test tube is neither living nor non-living. Hence, while metabolism is a defining feature of all living organisms without exception, isolated metabolic reactions in vitro are not living things but surely living reactions. Hence, cellular organization of the body is the defining feature of life forms. The most obvious and technically complicated feature of all living organisms is this ability to sense their surroundings or environment and response to these environmental stimuli, which could be physical, chemical, or biological. We sense our environment through our sense organs. Plants respond to external factors like light, water, temperature, other organisms, pollutants, etc. All organisms, from the prokaryotes to the most complex eukaryotes, can sense and respond to environmental cues. Photoperiod affects reproduction in seasonal breeders, both plants and animals. All organisms handle chemicals entering their bodies. All organisms, therefore, are aware of their surroundings. Human being is the only organism who is aware of himself, that is, has self-consciousness. Human beings are conscious not only of the world around them, but also of themselves, their activities, their bodies, and their mental lives. They are, that is, self-conscious or self-aware. Self-consciousness can be understood as an awareness of oneself. Consciousness therefore becomes the defining property of living organisms. When it comes to human beings, it is all the more difficult to define the living state. We observe patients lying in coma in hospitals, virtually supported by machines which replace heart and lungs. The patient is otherwise brain dead. The patient has no self-consciousness. Are such patients who never come back to normal life living or non-living? All living phenomena are due to underlying interactions. Properties of tissues are not present in the constituent cells, but arise as a result of interactions among the constituent cells. It is said that when the cells interact with each other only, the tissue can perform its function. Let's take the example of blood. Blood is capable of carrying oxygen and carbon dioxide. But WBCs or platelets are not capable of doing, in spite of being the constituent of blood. The properties of cell organelles are not present in the molecular constituents of cell organelle, but arise as a result of interactions among the molecular components comprising the cell organelle. For example, ribosome is a non-membrane bound cell organelle which is a site for protein synthesis. It is made of proteins and rRNA, that is ribosomal RNA. If these components are separated individually, they cannot perform the process of protein synthesis. We can say that living organisms are self-replicating, evolving, and self-regulating interactive systems capable of responding to external stimuli. What is diversity in the living world? What are taxonomic categories? What is classification? What do you mean by binomial nomenclature? What are taxonomical aids? Let us discuss all these topics in the next video, The Living World Part 2.